00661 leaving my airspace, frequency change approved. Ghost 00661 Joshua approach. Squawk 72 tree.
Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Hangar 412, the show that gives you the rundown on the lore and technology behind some of our favorite vehicles in fiction. And in today's episode, that's never been more true, because we're exploring the lore behind Eggman's flagship, the Egg Carrier. One of my all-time favorite airships from fiction.
One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. Little interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power, you almost never get it back. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back.
Rather than referring to a single ship, however, the term egg carrier actually refers to a line of airborne aircraft carriers designed, manufactured, and operated by the Eggman Empire, with the most famous of which first appearing in the skies over Station Square in the United Federation in the late 1990s. There may be several different iterations of the egg carrier that have been created over the decades. However, the craft's role as Dr. Ivo Robotnik's personal yacht and flagship never changes. The original egg carrier was developed sometime in the 1990s as part of Dr. Ivo Robotnik's plan to attack Station Square as a sort of show of force to the rest of the nation and world at large. Ivo seems to have shared his grandfather's interest in the ancient god known as Chaos, and planned to control it as part of the attack on Station Square. This plan involved feeding Chaos all 7 Chaos Emeralds in order to transform it into its kaiju state. Why this is important is the egg carrier was originally developed partly as a method of defending against Chaos if things inevitably go awry, and they do. The egg carrier featured 5 short runways clustered together near the bow of the ship, just above the main gun, with 2 of the outermost runways being the longest, with the 4 center runways acting as sort of a taxiway between the elevator and the main runways. As for actual armaments and defensive measures, the carrier came armed with 12 cannons with 360-degree firing radii along the perimeter and upper decks, along with 18 searchlights to track and blind pilots. The ship also came armed with 48 unique cannons that, rather than being like a traditional cannon where you just aim and fire, these had 7 different barrels that they were capable of firing out of it one at a time that would be pointing out in all directions in a radial pattern, with 6 of these barrels pointing directly outward and 1 of these barrels pointing directly upward. And these cannons were scattered across the hull, flight surfaces, and flight deck. Along with the 7-barreled cannons, the egg carrier also seems to have an unknown number of aerial mine dispensers, for a last line of defense before you get to what we'll be discussing next. The carrier also featured 14 robotic claws, presumably for maintenance and picking up or moving cargo around, though it also appears they were used to clamp onto and capture or at least damage enemy aircraft that attempted boarding action or otherwise got too close. The craft also features a small drill on the bow for some reason, subtly incorporating the good doctor's face into the aircraft's design. It seems Ivo must have inherited his grandfather's habit of working his face into his creation's designs, as sort of an artist's signature. A narcissistic one, but still an artist signature nonetheless. But by far, the egg carrier's most famous or infamous weapon, depending on your perspective, was its main gun, the Eggman Cannon, or simply just the Egg Cannon. An absolutely massive light amplification by stimulated emission or radiation directed energy weapon, or laser, concealed in the nose cone that makes up the real bow of the ship, I would say. As for propulsion, the egg carrier featured 9 incredibly huge main engines at the stern of the craft. 6 of these are located in triangular clusters along the horizontal stabilizers or elevators or whatever those are supposed to be. And the final 2 are located at the top just underneath the vertical stabilizers or chimneys or whatever those are supposed to be, and seem to run half the length of the entire ship, with their intakes being located just forward of the bridge. But before we get to the main center engine, I would like to point out that the ship also has 2 engines right towards the bow of the ship, right behind the Eggman Cannon, which would lead me to believe that they are for added yaw control, like I'll mention with the engines over the Aquatic Center, or to counter the recoil from the Eggman Cannon. That would be my guess. And finally, we have the main center engine, the largest of them all. Though oddly enough, this seems to be like one of the only engines without like a clear air intake, so it would either share its air intake with that of the 2 previously mentioned engines under the smokestacks, the air intakes that run like halfway along the ship, or it would have to be from what makes a little smiley face under the drill on the bow of the ship. That would be my only guess. Like, where does the air come from that powers this, like, most important engine on the whole ship? The carrier also seems to feature 2 more extremely tiny engines located on the rear upper corners of the Aquatic Center, held on by little pylons there, which also act as wings. Nice touch, by the way. And I would imagine that these engines are probably for, like, extra yaw control and added stability, maybe, because in comparison to all the other engines, they're extremely small. So I can't imagine they added any extra real meaningful forward thrust to the equation. The craft also featured 4 relatively small vertical lift engines pointed outward at an angle to help with its vertical flight capabilities in this mode, with the wings retracted. The egg carrier also had the ability to transform and extend its wings during flight for added maneuverability and to expose even more weaponry, while also having the benefit of making it harder for any enemy aircraft that may have landed on the carrier's flight deck to deploy their troops to the carrier's bridge. In this transformed combat configuration, the craft also had the ability to utilize 4 engines on the inner sides of the wings for added maneuverability and speed. But the craft was most often seen flying in its cruise or VTOL configuration. In this VTOL flight mode, the wings themselves act as extra armor plating as they're folded, giving the ship the ability to lock down like a turtle or armadillo. This leads us to the carrier's use as a mobile command center. The ability for the ship to change its profile allows it to hide in dense forests or jungles by hiding in the overgrowth, making it nearly impossible to detect from the air. And I would imagine even the ground unless you're right up against the thing. Also, while in its cruise or VTOL state, the carrier could also stay submerged on the ocean floor for extended periods, again making the vehicle extremely hard to detect when hiding. As the ship acted as a mobile command center, it came equipped with a main hauler auditorium for mission briefings and presentations that also acted as a bit of a nexus point for the entire vessel. It even included a suspended monorail station to transport you to and from the flight deck no matter the transformation status of the ship itself. There also seems to be charging pads or ports or docking stations, whatever you want to call them, for Eggman's classic Eggmobile along the walls of the auditorium. This hall is also connected to a robotics lab and workshop, holding cells or brig, which oddly enough, in order to get to the brig from the main hall, you have to pass through a room strictly dedicated to whack-a-mole. So between the main hall and the brig is a whack-a-mole room. That's just strange and seems like odd planning to me. And next to that, we have the main corridors, which are collectively called the hot shelter. This hot shelter leads us to the engine rooms and maintenance areas, and men and women's public bathrooms, women's on the right and men's on the left if you're coming from the elevator, the ship's internal rapid transit system and cargo bays, along with an inexplicably large, fully stocked aquarium. For some reason, you're supposed to keep heavy things like, oh, I don't know, water and fish to a minimum on an airship. This is why the showers and bathrooms in general were just absolutely awful on ships like the Hindenburg, for example. The walls were paper thin and you had very little water to work with, all just to save weight. Originally they carried a piano on board, but then they got rid of that because of course pianos are famously heavy. So other than for gameplay mechanics and to torture gamers for generations with that stupid fishing mini game, I can't imagine why there would be a fully stocked aquarium on an airship. Back to the main hall, we can go to the second floor balcony that leads us to some small maintenance areas and an armory, along with a password protected door that leads us to a teleporter room linked to a small base on a small tropical island inhabited by Chao. It appears that Eggman seems to have once tested weapons or crashed some kind of thing here, based on the giant rocket or missile thing that is crashed right on the beach there. And Sonic Team, hear me. Hear your fans. I don't know what this Marie Antoinette crap is, where you think you're so high and mighty above your audience that you think you know better, while still giving us the member berries, like, oh, remember Chao? Oh, but we don't want to give you Chao because you want Chao. Audience wants Chao. Typical game developer answer is, oh, we don't want to give you what you want because simply you want it. We want what we want, and you will enjoy that. No, Sonic Team, Sega, we want Chao Gardens back. You keep teasing us. I don't understand. Okay, rant over. I remember Chad Tronic even got so, like, sick of waiting that he made his own game, or at least attempted to. I don't actually know whatever happened. Back on the upper decks of the ship, we have the bridge and Eggman's personal quarters. The bridge is your typical ship bridge, but it does feature a very fun-looking moving captain's seat and some pistons to add some kinetic life to the room, I guess. Next we have the captain's personal quarters, complete with mini fridge and Murphy bed, and even a little balcony. I can't help but get the vibe the good doctor planned on entertaining company of the fairer sex with his little bachelor pad here. I mean, it just screams bachelor pad. Still has a lot of that like 70s decor, but with a kind of gaudy, but I also love it for that reason, very 90s aesthetic. Though the bed barely even seems big enough for him alone. So, I don't know. Next, we'll go to a small lobby connecting the bedroom to the bridge and rec room or arcade, featuring 4 slot machines and 2 coin-op rides that are the little Eggmobile, hinting at Eggman's line of theme parks and casinos that provide the funds for all of his magnificent inventions and war efforts. The arcade also seems to feature a throne of sorts framed by 2 large decorative rockets with a battery-powered little spinny airplane thingy hanging from the ceiling. You know, the ones you used to see at toy shops in the mall that would hang from the ceiling, had a little propeller behind them, and they would just go in a little circle tethered by a little piece of like fishing line. I used to have a couple of those. I love those things. And towards the stern of the ship, we have the previously mentioned Aquatic Center that's actually on sort of like a track system, so it can actually slide forward and backwards when the ship transforms. It's a little interesting touch I noticed. This room also contains a door at the bottom of the pool that leads you to a part of the ship that I was originally going to leave out of this video because it just totally makes no sense. But this door leads you to an area called the Sky Deck, which I believe is supposed to be the underside of the egg carrier, but none of it makes any sort of geometric sense at all. Like, this Sky Deck appears to be in its own little pocket dimension. That's why I was going to leave it out, because it really doesn't make much sense. But the Sky Deck contains runways and elevators to launch and recover fighters, of course, along with multiple cannons and some sort of cargo area that looks almost like an entire loading dock in and of itself. And for some reason has controls in the form of a lever to control the aircraft's pitch and roll. Again, for some unknown reason, why that would be in a cargo loading area, I have no idea. Sadly, the craft was brought down over the ocean after Sonic and friends engaged in a battle with chaos on the carrier's upper decks, on top of that giant glass showcase of all the inner workings, like some engineering toy or a Krispy Kreme donut machine. Yes, I referenced a Krispy Kreme donut machine. The craft sat in shallow waters for years until Eggman returned to recycle the ship by incorporating it into his Grand Egg Imperial, which was sent back across the multiverse to Sonic's world, where it was ultimately destroyed. Yes, we're getting into that stuff now. After the destruction of the original egg carrier, Eggman deployed the Egg Carrier 2 to regain control of Chaos after it transformed into its final kaiju state and began to attack Station Square out of Eggman's control. You know, as kaiju do. However, of course, predictably enough, the Egg Carrier 2 was also destroyed in the opening moments of this attack. And finally, we have a third egg carrier, which I only just discovered existed while working on this video. This third egg carrier was found in a hangar inside the wreckage of the Death Egg, located on Scrapnik Island. Though unfortunately, the ship's days in the skies over Mobius have long since come and gone. The carrier was decayed beyond repair and was covered in overgrowth. The locals called it the crown jewel of the island and jokingly referred to it as the scrambled egg carrier due to its poor physical state. The next flagship of Eggman's fleet would forego the egg carrier title in design completely. This new ship would be built as part of a massive armada of aerial battleships that would resemble giant fish, with the new flagship absolutely dwarfing Eggman's previous carriers and the rest of his ships in his fleet. This ship would resemble the silhouette of a whale with an absolutely massive center tower like you see on a typical old World War II battleship, topped with a replica of Eggman's head, of course acting as the ship's bridge. And yes, I know, whales are not fish, but every other ship in his fleet is. And this ship would be christened the Final Fortress, hinting that Eggman saw this as the final word in Flying Fortress design, as even the Guardian units of nations started to get into the whole flying battleship game. The ship was heavily damaged during a battle to recapture it and the rest of the Egg fleet from the control of Neo Metal Sonic. However, it would be repaired, and it would see itself transported across the multiverse just as her predecessor was. However, it would survive and make its way back to its home universe in the end. Though, sometime between this and the events of Sonic X Shadow Generations, the craft was destroyed or scuttled in the middle of the ocean. Eggman's next ship would once again seemingly skip the moniker of Egg Carrier, this time as part of a new Egg fleet. This time, the ship would take a more aggressive, sleeker look than her predecessors. Not much is known about this craft, however, but what we do know is that it featured canards, 2 main wings, and 2 vertical stabilizers at the rear, along with the distinctive tower topped with the bridge in the shape of Eggman's head once again. As for weapons, the ship possessed 5 2-barreled anti-ship cannons along the port and starboard sides of the craft, along with 2 2-barreled main guns on the top of the craft on either side just forward of the bridge tower. as well as 8 cannons along the bottom for air-to-ground attacks, with 2 being aligned one in front of the other on the nose, and then 6 along the sides underneath the aircraft. As for engines, all I could make out were what appears to be 2 large intakes behind the canards. So I would imagine that there's probably a cluster of engines, if not just 2 very large ones at the rear. But I don't know. I've never seen it from behind. But that's all we know and can guess about this vessel as far as all the information I could find. But as I love seeing in my comments, there seems to always be someone that has a little extra tidbit of information out there. So if that's you, please leave it down in the comments, and I will always be sure to make an updated video when I can. The next ship to take on the title of egg carrier would be an absolutely hideous redesign, only vaguely reminiscent of the original craft, mainly around the bow of the ship. I mean, I'm okay with anime, but I just can't stand that Evangelion art style. This ugly excuse for a ship featured just 4 main engines at the rear. However, it seems in this design, Eggman used his new gravity repulsor technology as extra propulsion, as 2 large and 4 small repulsors are seen at the rear pointing directly aft. On the note of repulsors, aside from the ones I just mentioned, the craft featured 20 around the stern of the ship. As for weapons, the ship featured 6 large anti-ship cannons and 2 massive main guns on the underside pointed downward towards the ground for air-to-ground attacks. But due to some wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey time travel shenanigans, the attack that Eggman built the ship for never ended up actually happening, and we don't know what that means for the ship. But because it was wiped from history and Sonic 06 was so freaking bad, it should have been a crime. I'm gonna just act like the game's plot did and pretend it never happened in the first place. That's why I did very little research on the ship. I didn't care to, and it was wiped from the timeline anyway, so what does it ultimately matter? And finally, we have the last known ship to be christened the Egg Carrier, which was essentially just the forward section of the Final Fortress, almost like a scaled down version of the Final Fortress. Because it was just this square airship, still with kind of fish-like fins, with the Final Fortress's iconic bridge tower in the middle. This egg carrier would be deployed to fend off the United Federation's Guardian Units of Nations forces assaulting the city of Metropolis that had been recently annexed by the Eggman Empire. This ship would meet its end during this attack after Tails boarded the craft and subsequently sabotaged the vessel's electrical systems, leading the ship to crash into the city below. Sounds about right. Gunn is famous for using the age-old superhero logic that destroying the city under enemy occupation is somehow liberation. Well, finally, we're at the end of the video. That's all the lore I could find on my absolute favorite airship in fiction. And I absolutely, positively love the design from the original Sonic adventure. I absolutely love how essentially it's just a flying luxury super yacht with runways, so that you don't need to land or dock it anywhere to board it. You can just stay in the sky or stay at sea. So it's like having your own private island that can also fly. And that open deck design is just an absolute dream. I mean, to this day, I still dream of living this shot of Eggman in the opening scene of Sonic Adventure, just standing proudly on the bridge of his ship as the world just passes by underneath him as he soars through the clouds. I just love that! Just the thought of standing on an airship with the wind blowing through my hair and the world passing by below, just... oh, what a dream. I mean, one of my favorite songs of all time, even to this day, is Airship Pirates by Abney Park. So, that should tell you something. Plus, I am a sucker for Eggman's red, white, black, and yellow industrial aesthetic. I just absolutely love that. All those colors contrast with each other, And I just think they look really cool together. Especially the way Eggman does it. Well, if you enjoyed watching or listening to this video on my favorite airship of all time as much as I did making it, definitely leave a comment down below on anything else notable I may have missed, or maybe what your favorite airship is. I definitely would love to see that down below. And definitely be sure to fire some anti-aircraft rounds into the bell and subscribe buttons. And share this video with anyone else that might be interested in Eggman's personal luxury air yacht. Peace, guys. Oh, and while I still have you, one of my first VR projects, and still probably one of my best works so far, is this video here, where you can actually ride the egg carrier if you have a VR headset, or just check it out in 360. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I tried it with a PSVR headset and had a ton of fun. So if riding aboard the egg carrier sounds interesting to you, click the link video here.
Children's and grandchildren's time, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to send their own agendas or knowledge to be questioned those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true. We slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness. The darkness, greedy, influential media, the 30-second sound bites, countdown to 10 seconds or less. Most common denominator of programming, credulous persons on pseudo-shams and superstition, but especially a connoisseur of ignorance.